On June 11, 1962, one of the most famous and mysterious prison escapes in history took place. Three men, Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin, managed to escape from the high-security prison of Alcatraz. This prison was located on a small island in the middle of San Francisco Bay, making it one of the most secure places in the world at the time. Alcatraz was known for being nearly impossible to escape from, and many considered it a maximum security prison. The island itself was isolated, surrounded by cold, dangerous waters with strong currents, making it incredibly hard for anyone to escape. The prison was filled with strict guards and had high walls, watchtowers, and thick fences, making it one of the toughest prisons in the United States. Despite all these barriers, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers found a way to break out. Their escape seemed like an impossible task, and it took months of careful planning. The fact that they managed to escape from one of the most secure prisons in the country made their escape a huge mystery. Even though the authorities searched for them for years, the three men were never found. No one knew where they went, and there was no clear answer as to whether they survived or whether they drowned in the cold, rough waters of the bay while trying to make their escape. What made this story so famous was that, even after a large-scale investigation, no one could confirm what had really happened to the three men. The FBI and other law enforcement agencies put in a lot of effort to track them down. But despite their best efforts, the escapees seemed to vanish without a trace. The mystery of whether the men survived their dangerous journey across the bay or if they were lost to the waters has puzzled people for decades. To this day, no one knows the full story, and it remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American criminal history. This escape wasn't just remarkable for how difficult it was to pull off, it was also shocking because the prisoners left no clear evidence behind. There were no bodies found, no concrete clues to suggest they drowned, and no proof that they had made it safely to the shore. This only deepened the mystery surrounding their disappearance, and the story became the subject of books, documentaries, and even movies. Their daring escape still captures the imagination of people around the world, who wonder what really happened on that night in June 1962. The fact that these men could disappear from such a secure place and that the authorities were never able to confirm their fate adds an element of intrigue and fascination. The escape from Alcatraz has remained a legendary tale of cunning, determination, and the desire for freedom, all while keeping the world guessing about whether they truly made it out or whether the treacherous waters claimed them. Alcatraz was a federal prison that first opened its doors in 1934, and it quickly became one of the most famous prisons in the United States. What made Alcatraz so unique was its location. The prison was built on a small, rocky island in the middle of San Francisco Bay, which meant it was surrounded by water on all sides. This made it nearly impossible for anyone to escape, because there was no way to easily get to the mainland. The cold, strong waters of the bay were full of dangerous currents and sharks, making any attempt to swim across the bay a life-threatening challenge. Alcatraz was meant to be a place where the worst criminals in the country would be held, men who were considered too dangerous or too difficult to rehabilitate. The idea was that if a prisoner was sent to Alcatraz, there was no way out. Because of its location and the harsh conditions inside, Alcatraz gained a reputation as a supermax prison, a place where escape was seen as nearly impossible. The prison had high concrete walls, watchtowers where armed guards kept watch, and heavy fences to prevent anyone from breaking out. The cells were small and uncomfortable, and the prisoners were watched closely at all times. Even though the prison was designed to be inescapable, it still housed some of the most notorious criminals in American history. This included well-known figures like Al Capone, the infamous gangster, and George "Machine Gun" Kelly, a notorious bank robber. These men were famous for their crimes and their ability to escape from other prisons, but they were kept securely in Alcatraz, where it was thought no one could break free. Inside Alcatraz, life was harsh. Prisoners had very little freedom. They were only allowed out of their cells for a few hours each day for exercise, meals, and work. Most of the time, they were confined to their small cells, which were cold and uncomfortable. The food was basic, and the guards kept a strict watch over the inmates. The prison was also known for its strict rules. If an inmate broke the rules, they could face punishments like being placed in solitary confinement, where they would be alone in a small, dark cell for days or weeks. The purpose of Alcatraz was not only to hold criminals, but to break their spirits and make them feel completely isolated and trapped. The idea was to make sure that no one would ever want to escape. However, despite these extreme conditions, some of the inmates were still determined to find a way out. Many tried and failed, but there were always a few who dreamed of escape. The most notable escapees were Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, who were clever, resourceful, and willing to do whatever it took to escape. While most prisoners would have given up on the idea of escaping from such a well-guarded prison, these three men were different. They studied the prison's weaknesses, planned their escape in secret, and used their intelligence to outsmart the guards. The fact that such a daring escape was even possible, given the strict conditions at Alcatraz, made their story even more incredible. These three men were determined to escape, and they were willing to take great risks to achieve that freedom. Even though the prison was designed to be inescapable, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers were among the few inmates who dared to challenge it. Frank Morris was a career criminal who had spent much of his life in and out of prison. Born in 1926, Morris started getting into trouble at a young age. He was arrested multiple times for crimes like theft and bank robbery. Over the years, he gained a reputation for being a clever and resourceful man, someone who could think his way out of difficult situations. He wasn't the kind of person who would just give up when faced with a problem. He was always looking for a way to escape, even when the odds were stacked against him. Morris was sent to Alcatraz after being convicted of several bank robberies. He had already spent time in other prisons, but Alcatraz was considered a place where even the most dangerous criminals couldn't escape. Despite this, Morris wasn't discouraged. He quickly earned a reputation in the prison as someone who was smart and difficult to deal with. He was known for tricking the guards and using his intelligence to manipulate situations to his advantage. Morris wasn't physically imposing or especially strong, but his sharp mind made him a dangerous opponent for the prison system. He spent months studying the prison's layout, carefully observing the guards' routines, and looking for any weak spots in the system. His calm demeanor and cleverness were part of what made him such a formidable figure in the prison. John and Clarence Anglin, the two brothers who helped Morris escape, had their own troubled histories with the law. The Anglin brothers were born into a large family in Georgia, and they had been in trouble with the law for much of their lives. Like Morris, they were involved in a series of robberies, which led to their conviction and eventual placement in Alcatraz. John and Clarence were known for their toughness and their ability to get things done under pressure. They weren't afraid of taking risks, and they were willing to do whatever it took to escape the confines of the notorious prison. While they weren't as well known as Morris for their intelligence, the brothers had a different set of skills that made them valuable members of the escape plan. The Anglins had a reputation for being able to get things inside the prison that others couldn't. They were clever in finding ways to sneak tools or materials into their cells, which helped them in their escape plan. Their resourcefulness was key to the escape effort. While they didn't have the same intellectual abilities as Morris, they worked well with him, forming a perfect team. Together, they created a detailed plan to escape Alcatraz. Each one brought something different to the table, but all of them shared a single powerful goal: to escape the prison and gain their freedom. Even though these three men, Morris and the Anglin brothers, were an unlikely group, they had something in common. They all wanted to break free from the high-security prison and the harsh conditions inside. Their desire for freedom pushed them to work together, using all their skills to come up with an elaborate plan. Frank Morris, with his sharp mind, acted as the mastermind of the escape. John and Clarence Anglin, with their resourcefulness and willingness to take risks, helped bring the plan to life. What made them different from the other prisoners at Alcatraz was their determination. While many inmates gave up on the idea of escaping from such a secure prison, these three men were willing to do whatever it took to try. Despite their different backgrounds, the three men formed a strong bond in the prison. They shared their plans with each other, and together they put in months of work, each step carefully calculated. Their escape wasn't just about physical strength. It was about patience, planning, and using their minds to outsmart the guards and the prison system. In the end, it was their cleverness, teamwork, and relentless pursuit of freedom that made their escape attempt so remarkable. The plan took a very long time and a lot of careful thinking. The three men knew they could not rush. Every step had to be quiet, hidden, and slow, so the guards would not notice anything unusual. They worked little by little for months, always careful not to draw attention. They began by collecting small, ordinary items they could hide in their cells: spoons, pieces of metal, bits of wood, and anything that could be turned into a tool were kept out of sight. Because these objects were common and looked harmless, the guards did not pay much attention when the men had them. The prisoners taught themselves how to use those simple objects to chip away at concrete without making a lot of noise. The men learned how to work in the dark and in small spaces. When they scraped concrete, they did it a little at a time. They rubbed, scraped, and dug slowly so the sound would be soft. Often they waited until times when the prison was loud, during meals or during exercise, to cover any small noises their work might make. They also planned how to hide the holes they made. From the outside of the cell, it had to look like a normal wall, so they created false covers and used materials to hide their progress. They made the openings small enough that guards would not easily see them during routine checks, but large enough for a person to squeeze through when the escape started. A key part of the plan was timing. The men watched the guards for weeks to learn their routines. They learned when guards changed shifts, when lights were dimmer, and when checks were less careful. This careful watching let them pick the safest moment to move, usually at night when it was darker and quieter. The ventilation system became their escape route. By chipping through the back walls, they reached small tunnels and vents that ran inside the prison walls. These vents were narrow and cramped, but they led to the roof. The men practiced moving through tight, dark spaces so they would not panic during the real escape. They also made the dummy heads and practiced using them. The heads were shaped to look like sleeping faces and were placed on pillows so a guard doing a quick check would think the prisoner was asleep. To make the heads look real, they used hair they had collected at the prison barber and a material like plaster to form faces. The masks did not need to stand up to close inspection, only to trick a quick head count. Finally, they planned the last parts carefully: how to get from the roof to the ground and how to leave the island. They made ropes and other simple tools to climb down walls. Every detail was planned and rehearsed in their heads many times. In the end, the long, patient planning, the careful hiding, the slow digging, the watching of guards, and the clever use of dummy heads and vents is what made their escape attempt possible. On the night of June 11, 1962, the three men, Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin, finally put their long months of planning into action. Everything they had worked on, every detail they had planned, was now about to be tested. They knew they had to be quick and quiet, so as not to alert the guards or anyone in the prison. The first step in their escape was to crawl through the small holes they had carefully dug in the back walls of their cells. The men had used spoons, metal pieces, and other makeshift tools to create openings in the walls. These holes led to the ventilation system inside the prison. It was a dark, narrow, and cramped space, but it was the key to getting out of their cells unnoticed. After crawling through the holes, the men entered the ventilation system, which ran through the walls of the prison. The tunnels were dark and filled with dust and debris, but they had no choice. They had to move through them quietly and quickly. The ventilation system connected the various parts of the prison, including the roof, which was their next destination. The escapees had been preparing for this moment for months, practicing their movements and making sure they could crawl through the tight spaces without being detected. It was a risky move, as the guards patrolled the prison at regular intervals, but the men had studied their routines and knew when the guards would be the least attentive. After crawling through the vents, the three men finally reached the roof of Alcatraz. From there, they had to carefully climb down the side of the building. It was a steep drop, but they had made a plan for this too. They had fashioned makeshift ropes out of cloth and string that they had secretly collected over time. Using these ropes, they were able to climb down the side of the prison without drawing attention. The ropes were not perfect, and the climb was dangerous, but they had no choice. They had to get off the roof without being seen. Once they were safely on the ground, they made their way across the prison yard, moving quickly but quietly. The next obstacle was the outer fence surrounding the prison. Alcatraz was surrounded by a high, thick fence that made it almost impossible to escape. However, the men had thought of this too. They had secretly created another rope, made from bits of cloth and string, which they used to climb over the outer fence. The fence was a huge barrier, but the men had prepared for this final hurdle. They knew that once they crossed the fence, they would be out of the main prison area, but they still had one more challenge ahead of them: the cold, dangerous waters of San Francisco Bay. To cross the bay, the three men had built a small raft using raincoats they had collected over time. They had inflated the raincoats and tied them together to create a makeshift raft that could carry them across the water. They also made rudimentary oars from sticks and other materials they had found in the prison. The water was cold, and the current was strong, making this part of the escape extremely dangerous. The men knew the risks. If they got caught in the currents, or if their raft fell apart, they could drown. But despite the danger, they were determined to escape. They knew that once they got across the bay, they would be free. The strong currents of the bay made paddling difficult, but the men worked together to guide the raft. The water was dark and cold, and they were far from the safety of the prison. But they pushed forward with everything they had. It was a tense, terrifying journey, but after what seemed like an eternity, they finally made it to the other side of the bay. They had escaped from one of the most secure prisons in the world, and no one knew where they were. By the time the guards discovered the men were gone, it was too late. The escape had been carefully planned, and everything had gone smoothly, at least up until that point. The authorities quickly realized that the men had used the ventilation system, the ropes, and the makeshift raft to escape, but by then they were already far away from the prison. The escape had worked. For a brief moment, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers were free. The next morning, on June 12, 1962, the routine head count at Alcatraz revealed something shocking. When the guards went to check on the prisoners, they quickly noticed that 3 men were missing: Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence. At first, the guards thought it might just be another attempted escape, but they soon realized something was very strange. The cells of the missing prisoners appeared normal at first glance, but when the guards looked more closely, they discovered the startling details. On each of the men's pillows, there were lifelike masks made from plaster, hair, and other materials. The masks were so realistic that it looked as if the men were still lying in their beds. It was as if the prisoners had simply vanished into thin air, leaving only these fake faces behind to trick the guards. The discovery of the masks was a huge shock. It showed that the prisoners had planned their escape carefully and had managed to fool the guards into thinking they were still inside their cells. The masks were so convincing that they seemed to be sleeping, even though they were actually long gone. The guards immediately alerted prison officials, who quickly realized that the men had escaped. This wasn't just an ordinary escape attempt, it was an elaborate, well-thought-out plan that had worked. As soon as the guards confirmed the escape, they contacted the FBI. A full-scale manhunt began right away. The authorities knew they had to find the escapees before they could disappear forever. The FBI and local authorities launched an intense search to find the three men. They began by searching the waters of San Francisco Bay, hoping to find any signs that the men had tried to swim across. The bay was cold, and the currents were strong, so they feared the prisoners might have drowned trying to make the crossing. The authorities also searched the area around the bay, looking for any signs that the escapees had reached the shore. They scoured nearby islands, checked the beaches, and followed up on any reports from local residents who might have seen something unusual. The search was widespread, covering the entire Bay Area, but there was still no sign of the men. The investigation became even more complicated when no bodies were found in the bay. In a case like this, where prisoners had escaped into such dangerous waters, the authorities expected to find at least some evidence, such as a body or clothing, washed up on the shore. But nothing turned up. There were no remains in the bay, and no trace of the escapees was found. This only deepened the mystery. Had the three men made it across the bay? Had they survived the perilous journey? Or had they drowned, their bodies lost in the cold waters? Without any physical evidence, the case became even more puzzling. Despite a thorough search by the FBI, no clear answers emerged. The authorities continued to follow leads, but each one seemed to lead to a dead end. People were left to wonder whether the escapees had managed to make it to safety, or whether the deadly waters of the bay had claimed them. As the days passed with no results, the mystery surrounding the escape deepened. It was one of the most famous prison escapes in history, and the fact that the men disappeared without a trace only made it more intriguing. The search for Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers would continue for years, but no one could say for certain what had happened to them. After the escape, the FBI launched an investigation that lasted for several years, hoping to find some trace of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. They scoured the bay, the nearby islands, and the surrounding area for clues. Despite their best efforts, no evidence was ever found to prove that the men had survived. The search involved agents looking into every lead, talking to potential witnesses, and even searching for any signs that the escapees might have reached the mainland. But the investigation turned up nothing. The lack of evidence left authorities with many unanswered questions. Did the men make it across the bay? Were they swept away by the strong currents of San Francisco Bay and drowned? Or did they manage to escape and begin new lives elsewhere? These questions lingered, but no answers ever came. The FBI also investigated the possibility that the escapees had fled to another country, such as South America. At the time, it was not uncommon for criminals to flee the United States and start new lives in places like Brazil, where there were fewer extradition laws. The authorities followed up on this theory by checking for any signs of the men in other countries, but again, nothing concrete was ever found. The escapees seemed to have vanished completely. This left many people wondering if they had somehow managed to survive and escape to a place where they could start over, or if they had simply met their end trying to cross the dangerous waters of the bay. Many people believed that the escapees didn't survive the dangerous waters of San Francisco Bay. The cold temperatures, strong currents, and the sheer distance from Alcatraz to the mainland made the swim across the bay nearly impossible. This led to the common belief that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers perished in the water, their bodies carried away by the currents. However, not everyone agreed with this theory. Some people held on to the idea that the escapees had survived and somehow made it to safety. They suggested that the men might have received help from people on the outside, perhaps family members or friends who were waiting for them. Others believed that the escapees used the confusion of their escape, when guards were focused on the missing prisoners and the investigation, to slip away unnoticed and hide in the city of San Francisco. Over time, the mystery of what happened to Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers led to many different theories and rumors. Some people believed that the escapees had made it to the mainland and successfully blended in with the population. There were even reports suggesting that the men had lived for years under new identities, possibly starting fresh in other parts of the country. Other rumors claimed that they had been caught by gangsters or criminals who had their own reasons for wanting to get rid of them. Yet, despite all these theories, none of them could be proven. The authorities never found any solid evidence to support any of the rumors or ideas about the escapees' fate. As the years passed, the case became one of the most famous unsolved mysteries in American history. The story of the escape from Alcatraz has fascinated people for decades, and the question of whether the men survived or died still remains unanswered. Some have suggested that the case should be closed, given the lack of evidence, but the mystery persists. The FBI officially closed its investigation in the 1970s, but the story of the escape continues to be a source of intrigue and speculation. The case remains open, and the disappearance of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers still stands as one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. To this day, no one knows for sure what happened to them after they vanished from Alcatraz. The escape from Alcatraz has become one of the most famous and talked about events in criminal history. Over the years, it has captured the imagination of people all around the world. It is not just remembered for its daring and mysterious nature, but also for the way it challenges ideas about prison and punishment. The story of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers has been told in countless books, documentaries, and movies. One of the most well-known films about the escape is Escape from Alcatraz, a 1979 movie starring Clint Eastwood. The film dramatizes the escape and has made the story even more famous. The escape also raises important questions about the prison system. Despite the supposedly foolproof security of Alcatraz, these three men found a way to escape. This has led many to think about the limits of what a prison can actually do to keep people locked up forever. Can any prison truly hold someone for life if they are determined enough? The escape from Alcatraz serves as an example of human ingenuity, determination, and resourcefulness. The three men didn't just rely on strength or force, they used their brains and patience to pull off a clever and dangerous plan. Their ability to trick the guards, escape through small holes in the walls, and survive a treacherous journey across the bay showed how far people will go for freedom. Although Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers were never found, their escape continues to capture the public's attention. Whether the men survived or not, the fact that they managed to break out of a high-security prison like Alcatraz remains a powerful story of defiance. The escape represents the lengths people are willing to go to gain their freedom, even in the face of seemingly impossible odds. The mystery surrounding their fate adds to the allure, making it a story that people continue to talk about and speculate on. Since the escape, the prison at Alcatraz has been closed, but the story of the breakout continues to live on. Today, Alcatraz is a popular tourist destination, drawing thousands of visitors each year. People come from all over the world to learn about the prison's history and to see the famous cells where prisoners like Al Capone and George Machine Gun Kelly were held. But for many visitors, the most fascinating part of the tour is the mystery of the escape. People still wonder whether Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers made it to safety, or whether they perished in the cold waters of San Francisco Bay. This unanswered question has kept the story alive and continues to spark interest. The escape is now an integral part of Alcatraz's legend. It's not just a tale of criminals trying to escape, it's a story that reflects human resilience and the desire for freedom, no matter the cost. The fact that the escape remains unsolved only adds to its appeal. For many, the mystery of what happened to the three men is part of what makes the story so compelling. Every year, people still visit Alcatraz, hoping to catch a glimpse of the escapees' fate. And the story of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers remains one of the most famous unsolved mysteries in the world. The escape from Alcatraz stands as one of the most famous and mysterious prison breaks in history. It has captured the attention of people for decades because of the boldness and cunning behind the escape, as well as the enduring mystery surrounding the fate of the three men involved. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, managed to pull off a daring escape from one of the most secure prisons in the world. But even after years of investigation, no one knows for sure what happened to them. Despite all the efforts made by the FBI and local authorities to find them, the men vanished without a trace. Their disappearance has kept people wondering, did they survive and manage to start a new life somewhere? Or did they meet their end in the cold, dangerous waters of San Francisco Bay? The truth may never be fully uncovered, and that uncertainty is what continues to make the story so fascinating. While the details of their fate remain unknown, the escape itself remains a legendary chapter in the history of American crime and punishment. It is a reminder of the power of human determination, creativity, and the lengths some will go to for freedom. The escape from Alcatraz is not just a story of criminals attempting to break free, but a testament to how people can outsmart even the most secure systems when they are motivated enough. Whether or not the escapees survived, their story has become a symbol of defiance against authority, and it raises important questions about the effectiveness of prisons and the lengths to which individuals will go to fight for their freedom. Today, the story is still told in books, movies, and documentaries, and it remains one of the most enduring and unsolved mysteries in American history.